Happy birthday to our National Health Service. Our NHS is a much-loved national institution, yet it's now in crisis. When the Tories came into government 13 years ago, the NHS was the best in the world, and now it's collapsing because it doesn't have enough staff, enough funds, enough beds, and because of the impact of the social care crisis. The Royal College of Emergency Medicine states that there are now over 500 deaths each week from delays with the transfer of patients from emergency departments to wards. Tens of thousands of people are coming to harm from ambulance delays, and privatisation is leading to deaths which could have been prevented. As we recognise and celebrate the 75th anniversary of our NHS, it's vital that we commit to fighting to defend our NHS and that we do not allow it to be destroyed. We all know the thinking behind this wicked Tory ideology: to run down our public services, starve them of vital funding to make them cheaper to privatise and give to their rich friends to make money from. We must step up the fight against privatisation. We must fight for investment in staff, in buildings and services. We must go back to putting health before profit and demand a reversal of these disastrous privatisation policies. If not, our NHS might not survive another 75 years. As well as saying happy birthday to the NHS, I'd like to thank everyone who has campaigned against cuts to our health services, all the workers taking action to defend our services, as well as fighting for better pay. Your efforts are valued and appreciated. I work closely with Save South Tyneside Hospital campaigners, and I want to thank them for their tireless work over the past 7 years, as well as thanking those I work with nationally. SOS NHS, we own it, your NHS needs you, every doctor, and keep our NHS public. Doing all we can to speak up for our NHS. For the 75th birthday, I commit to fighting to ensure this country puts health before profit. I hope you will all stand with me. Happy birthday.
Happy 75th anniversary to the NHS. 75 years since Windrush, 75 years since the NHS. We need to ensure that we keep the NHS public and also free at the point of use for everybody. It's vital. You know, the NHS used to be the envy of the world. It isn't so much now, but it's not too late to save it, and we need to make sure that we do that. So my heartfelt thanks to everybody that's working hard in the NHS, and we will continue to fight for you. And when Labour's in power, we continue to fight for you and keep the NHS.
My name's Paul Novak, I'm the General Secretary of the TUC, and I just want to pass on this message on the 75th anniversary of our National Health Service, a service that we're all incredibly proud of in this country. And I think we need to send a message out that we need to fight for our NHS. We need to address that recruitment and retention crisis for staff in the NHS, 133,000 vacancies. We need to address years and years of underfunded and underinvestment. And we need to make sure the NHS stays public, in public hands, delivering for the British public. So on the 75th anniversary of the NHS, let's stand up for the NHS, let's stand up for the people who rely on the NHS and who work in our NHS.
Hi, it's Matt Rack from the Fire Brigade Union. I want to say happy birthday to the NHS, one of the most well-loved institutions in Britain today. I want to send solidarity to all NHS workers. I want to say that all of us have got to stand together against privatising our health service, stand up for decent health care, for investment, for long-term commitment to our health service. Happy birthday, NHS.
Right, okay, that's our messages of support from some people. We're going to move on quickly, but before we do, I just want to kind of put this meeting in a bit of context. Of course, it's the 75th anniversary of the NHS. It's a moment which we should be celebrating and cheering and banging pots and pans, but of course the NHS is on its knees. One of the things I hope we will get out of this meeting is to talk about the things that's great about the NHS, why it's worth fighting for, but also how we can fight for it and the reasons it's on its knees. And it's not that it's a broken model. It's not that we need more privatisation. It's not that it's a bottomless pit of funding. It can and must be properly funded. It can be restored fully to a public service. And that's the kind of thing that we believe will make it, once again, as it has been for a great deal of its life, one of the best healthcare services, if not the best healthcare services in the world. This week alone, we've had loads of events and fantastic stunts and actions already. On Saturday, there was a great Northern March for the NHS starting in Leeds. There's a Socialist Health Association conference in London, and we've had events in Sunderland and Ealing and all kinds of other places up and down the country, including on a Sunderland beach this morning, a fantastic big Heart NHS sand drawing, which has been in the press quite a lot today, and come to the Keep Our NHS Public website to check it out. We'll be putting links in the chat as we go all the way through this meeting. Please do visit the website. Please do check out some of the stories and other things that we're going to be talking about. I'll be making some more announcements at the end. This is being recorded. It is being live streamed to Facebook. You will get a chance to watch it again. You can enable captions at the bottom of your screen if that's useful to you. But we are now going to get started. Now, I think, Paula, you're taking the place of Ellen Clifford. So Paula Peters, many of you will know who she is. It was always great to hear from disabled people against the cuts. If you can unmute yourself, I'll pin you to the screen and let's get started. Great to see you.
Good evening, Tom, everyone watching online. Happy birthday to our NHS. And Ellen is really, really sorry that she's not able to speak this evening. She's currently going through her personal independence payments reassessments. And I'm sure any of you who've been through it know, it's a really horrible, debilitating experience. She is, however, online watching and has asked me to read out what she's written on her behalf. This is what she has to say, and I echo her words entirely. I'm honoured to have been asked to speak on behalf of Disabled People Against Cuts, DPAC, at this 75th birthday celebration for the NHS. I send much love for the NHS and solidarity to all those fighting to keep it. Disabled people are disproportionately reliant on the NHS, and whilst our relationship with medical approaches to disability is neither straightforward nor without some tension, there is no question that disabled people in Britain are internally grateful for its existence. While still far from equal citizens, the roles we have to play in society are markedly more active than those of our disabled siblings in countries without access to free healthcare. The funding of a health service free at the point of need remains a remarkable achievement. This is made all the clearer through comparison to social care support. Many disabled people are priced out of social care services that are essential for their well-being and for any kind of quality of life. Hundreds of thousands of disabled people are now trapped in social care debt. This is why DPAC and other organisations and networks run by and for deaf and disabled people are campaigning with Keep Our NHS Public for a national independent living support service free at the point of need to sit alongside the NHS. You'll agree this is no light undertaking. But as well as looking back and celebrating the birth and development of the NHS, and there are many different aspects to celebrate, from the commitment to helping others shown by its staff to the wonderful diversity of its workforce, now is a time to look forwards, to plan how we protect such a fundamentally important institution from the privateers determined to tear it apart, and also to dream even bigger. On the news yesterday, I saw a 75th anniversary feature that presented the voices of different people involved in the NHS. The one that struck me most was a hospital porter from Bolton. He spoke of how he values his job as a chance to help other people. He said that as well as looking back, we should be able to be looking forwards to another 75 or even another 150 years of the NHS. He reminded me how the majority of the public do value the NHS, and his boldness inspired me. What is sadly true, however, is that our politicians only pay lip service to valuing the NHS, and they carry on regardless with their plans to run it into the ground and sell it off. We also have to remember how we got the NHS in the first place, and it wasn't through asking nicely for it. The NHS was established as part of the welfare state in the wake of two long, hard world wars and a Great Depression, through which the working class suffered terribly. At the end of World War II, they were not prepared to go back to things as they had been. They had access to weapons and were trained to use them. As often repeat quote goes, if we don't give them reform, they will give us revolution. The situation we are in today is very different. As the balance of forces currently stand, it is a tremendous challenge for us, not only to win back the NHS, but to go further still. Disabled people have not forgotten that we were deliberately left out of the original welfare settlement. It will take a considerable co-coordinated and united effort to free society from the interests of profit that currently dominate, and to build a society run instead in the interests of the many. That's why it's so important for us all to celebrate and support the amazing industrial action being taken by NHS workers across different professions. They do so much difficult day-to-day jobs under bad and worsening conditions, on top of which they are not engaged in a serious battle against the government and the right-wing media who demonise them on all of our behalves to save the NHS. So on this, the NHS 75th birthday, it is most fitting that those of us who benefit from, but don't work within the NHS, take time to salute their struggle. And on behalf of me, and I'm sure Ellen won't mind, I want to pay personal tribute to all the cancer staff at St Thomas's and Guy's who have given my friend another chance at life with their prompt and amazing treatment. The care she's had at Guy's Cancer Centre has been second to none. So to all the oncology staff at King's and Guy's, we love you very much. Happy 75th birthday. And I promise you, on behalf of everyone at DPAC, we are behind you 100%, and you have our full support. Thank you and solidarity. We love our NHS. Now we must come together and fight it so we have it for another 150 years. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you, Paula. Lots of people applauding there, of course. And the NHS represents the best of us as well. And that's obviously a reason why we must keep fighting and working together for it. Our next speaker is Lester Holloway, who is from The Voice newspaper. If you turn your... there you go. If you come in, I will pin you to the screen so everybody can see. There you go. Over to you, Lester. Thanks for joining us.
No, thank you. Thank you for inviting me, and happy birthday to the NHS, and solidarity with all NHS workers and campaigners that are fighting to keep this a public service. I'm very pleased to be invited to say a few words. Of course, last week was the 75th anniversary of the Windrush, the arrival of the Windrush pioneers, and today is the 75th anniversary of the NHS. And of course, those two anniversaries are intricately and intimately connected because the Caribbean nurses were an essential part of building the NHS. And what it shows, of course, is that the NHS is founded on ideals. And one of those ideals clearly is about being a public service to all who need it, free at the point of use. But the other ideal is multiculturalism, which is hardwired into the story of the NHS. And the combination of being a public service and multiculturalism are the two things
of course, which many Tories, indeed if not all of them, hate. Now, of course, when it comes to the ideals of equality, sometimes the service has fallen short, not as a result of the efforts of hardworking staff, but as a result of government underfunding and management as well. And of course, the underinvestment in the NHS and austerity has had a terrible effect on the service. And of course, lack of priority we've seen when it comes to equality as well, which is why we've got a situation where Black women are 4 times more likely to die in and around childbirth. And it was disgusting that just a few days ago, Steve Barclay, the Health Secretary, decided that he was going to ignore recommendations from the All-Party Women and Equalities Committee to set targets to reduce that. But I also want to pay tribute to the fact that when we have seen progress in the NHS towards race equality, it's actually been as a result of quite often of Black staff and of unions of all backgrounds that have been at the forefront of pushing this. So when it comes to multiculturalism and the NHS, I think what this shows is that this is part of the story of Britain. And the story of Britain is one of being a real melting pot of all nations and immigrants that have come together to make this country and this health service a much better place. And so it's not just about immigrants enriching society, when it comes to culturally and economically, but it's also about them building this society. And it's not just about the last 75 years, it's also about the last 400, 500 years as well, because this is also a story about how in a different context, slavery and colonialism built Britain as well. I just want to finally end in relation to austerity. Now, austerity has absolutely decimated and brought the NHS to its knees. And as a result, many nurses have left the profession because it's underpaid and highly stressed. And what the NHS are trying to do to fill the gap is to bring many nurses from particularly West Africa, but also East Africa as well, to try and fill that gap. And while more immigration enriches society, as I mentioned, it also causes a brain drain as well in those countries. They're called red list countries, where they have a shortage of healthcare staff themselves. So the solution here is to actually pay better, more pay for nurses, better conditions, more investment in the service as a whole, and then we won't be in this. Situation. So what we need to do is to save the NHS, to keep it public, but at the same time, it's also about rebuilding the service, in the image that we want, in the image that it was founded on as a public service. And that includes making sure that equality is at the heart of the NHS. Thank you.
Thank you, Lester. Absolutely. And all of the reasons you've said is exactly why the NHS is the best of us, because it's multicultural, because it's for everybody, and it's run by everybody. So thanks so much for that. It's an international thing, as it should be. Okay, moving on. We're going to take now our Keep Our NHS Public co-chair. Some of you know him, Dr. Tony O'Sullivan. Over to you.
Thanks very much, Tom, and thanks to Paula and Lester. Before I get into what I was wanting to say, can I just mention 2 really excellent articles at this time of celebrating the anniversary of the NHS, and I recommend them from our KOMP website, and I'll put them in the chat later. One is Lessons from the 1930s, Blueprints and Red Lines, and that was written by Liz Peretz of Oxford Keep Our NHS Public, the Socialist Health Association, and We Own It. And that's a background to the struggle, the campaigning to get the NHS in the first place, going right back to the 30s. And then Bevan's Founding Principles for the NHS have stood the test of time, a really excellent John Lister special. He's the editor of Health Campaigns Together and a member of Keep Our NHS Public. I think some reference to history is really important at this time, as we're on the verge, if we're not careful, of losing the NHS. Now, we all know that the NHS, when funded for need and not defunded for ideological reasons, was and will be again the best in the world. Just an aside, please join Keep Our NHS Public and help us fight for the NHS with our allies in the coming months and years. The NHS has not failed the population. It's actually being failed by our politicians. The democratic principles of the NHS at its foundation remain strong and true, but you can make any system fail by starving it of sufficient funding. And you can keep it alive, but parasitized by private interests. That parasite is private healthcare and associated interests, and they're encircling the NHS clinical services and also NHS management and planning. And this is the dual attack of underfunding and privatisation. We know that if annual funding had been at the comparable level of France and Germany, the UK would have had between 40 to 70 billion pounds in real terms annually over the years 2010 to 2019. And it would have invested 33 billion pounds more in the NHS estate and equipment over those years. And dare I remind Boris Johnson and the Conservatives of the empty promise of 40 hospitals. That is why there are currently 112,000 NHS vacancies, 165,000 in social care, why waiting lists are killing people, why hospital ceilings are cracking, and why many GP surgeries are not fit for purpose. And that is why, as Kate said earlier, there are 500 avoidable deaths from delays in acute care. And in a recent comparison of avoidable deaths across the world, 87 avoidable deaths per 100,000 people in Britain. And that's as bad as the USA. It's far worse than France, and much worse than Germany also. And it's why COVID-related deaths are now 337 people have died per 100,000 of the population. 337 compared with 209 in Germany, 180 in Ireland, and only 59 in New Zealand. We know that privatisation also doesn't work, and we know why. The private principle that drives that sector is profit, of course. The private sector was subsidised by Blair in the 2000s and gained a foothold, and that parasite is now thriving. Private companies make inroads into the NHS and take the funding out of the NHS. They skim the cream of services and cherry pick the easy, lucrative work. They leave complex care and groups of people more at risk for the NHS to deal with. Tory policy has sent billions of NHS funds and tens of thousands of patients to the private sector, and it's NHS staff working their extra sessions that they choose to do in the private sector, but the NHS that has to pick up the emergency care when things go wrong, to the cost of the NHS of over 70 million a year. So these dual attacks have fractured the founding principles of the NHS. We want them upheld and supported. The NHS model itself does not need reform. We call on all parties in opposition to agree that the NHS does not need reform beyond upholding and supporting those principles. We call on them, on the other hand, to commit to 5 fundamental shifts in policy current at this time. On funding, to commit to invest in the NHS and care services. Without this, we cannot have a healthy society and a healthy economy. On privatisation, commit to end profiteering. There is no spare capacity in the private sector. It's eating away at our NHS. And we ask them to commit to reinvest into rebuilding our NHS as a public service, with all the subsidies that go to the private sector ending and being reinvested for public use. On health and care workers, commit to safe staffing levels, pay them the value of their work, restore the respect due to all essential workers. On public health, commit to tackling health inequalities by reinvesting in public services and public health and addressing poverty, and to ensure pandemic preparedness and a safer future. And finally, to rebuild the NHS vision, to recapture some of the early services and to go further, commit to restoring universal healthcare, end migrant charges for the over 1 million people excluded from acute and mental health care, end prescription charges in England. They are already ended in Scotland. Build back NHS dentistry and community vision services, and seriously build mental health services for the first time. And finally, and crucially, end the disgrace that is our social care services and commit to build a national care, support and independent living service, because as for the NHS, the public model works. So join us in Keep Our NHS Public, please, and our trade union work through health campaigns together, and with our 55 organisational allies in SOS NHS, and help us raise the NHS loud and clear in the coming months as we face the next general election and a crucial point in the NHS's history. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Important. We've got some politicians in the room, so hopefully they are listening to what you're saying. That's great stuff. Lots of applause emojis happening. I'm going to move swiftly on to Holly Turner, as the founding member of NHS Workers Say No, who have done fantastic work over the last few years and has become a great ally and a great fighter for the NHS. She is, of course, a nurse, and you may have seen her speak before. It's always a pleasure to hear from her. Holly, we'll take you next.
Thank you, Tom. Yeah, pleasure to be here on what's quite a poignant day, really, on the 75th birthday of the NHS. So as I was introduced, I'm a campaigner, but I'm a registered learning disability nurse. And I've worked in the NHS for around 15 years, a registered nurse. And it really is my privilege to work with the group of people that I do. There's about 790,000 registered nurses in the UK, and only 17,000 of those are learning disability nurses. So I wanted to take this opportunity to really shine a light on our profession, and I'm really proud to do so. The reason I'm so passionate about my branch of nursing is because people with a learning disability are actually twice as likely to die from avoidable causes than the rest of the population, and they're more likely to be admitted to hospital with conditions that could have been prevented in the community if they had better community and primary health care. So for me, as long as I'm nursing, I will be advocating for this vulnerable group and advocating for them to have fulfilling, healthy and safe lives with access to education, opportunities and relationships in the same way as the rest of the general population do. Despite the challenges, I absolutely love nursing. I love being a nurse. I've always wanted to be a nurse since I was a child. And it's a huge part of my life, with my husband also being a nurse. We really, I think with campaigning as well, we do live and breathe the NHS. But from the beginning of my career as a nurse, it's been really painfully clear to me how deeply Westminster politics actually influence my ability to do the job that I trained to do. And I chose to be a nurse because I believed in treating people in a safe environment, but it's quite impossible to ignore the brutality which our government inflicts on the most vulnerable and the people who are in my care, and the very people I think need society's help the most. Now, Tony mentioned the vacancies, and across the health service, workers are really feeling the brunt of these vacancies. And like all NHS staff, nurses, we're dedicated to our work and we care deeply for our patients. But unfortunately, this level of commitment really is abused by those who force through year on year of cuts. And I think the fact that we care is often used against us to really demolish our basic working conditions and further our exploitation at work, which is why we started our grassroots campaign, NHS Workers Say No, in the summer of 2020. And at that moment, we were facing another round of pay cuts. The pandemic was further ravaging our services. And in the years since then, it's become a UK-wide campaign of healthcare workers, trade unionists. And campaigning at this pace for years is tough, and it really does require a significant commitment from us all. But we feel our place in this movement's essential, because whilst NHS workers, we're increasingly seeing our struggles aligned, and we demonstrate solidarity across all professions in the NHS and all grades of workers as well. So whilst we do that, there do remain 14 different health unions, which is a challenge. And NHS workers say no really is an attempt to bridge those divides. And aside from us and our campaigning, I do think across the NHS staff have really drawn their own conclusions around why we find ourselves where we do. And they have seen that the only way to fight back is to mobilise, but the ballot process is really tough and striking is hard. Particularly tough for people to vote to strike and lose pay when we're struggling in a cost of living crisis, which I think we can agree is affecting us all. But some strike action does continue across the health service, with junior doctors about to take 5 days of action. Society of Radiographers achieved a national mandate for strike action this week, and Unite remain in dispute and are balloting members at the moment. So please continue supporting those pickets if you can, because it really does mean everything to staff to see colleagues, the public and patients getting behind them. We have no confidence in the government's workforce plan that was recently released. We don't have any confidence in an increase in training places without seriously addressing the core reasons why applications to study nursing have actually dropped by 30%, or why we have this staggering amount of vacancies. And to staff, you know, we didn't cause this mess, and we certainly must not be the ones continuing to pay for it. So our fight is for a properly funded, properly staffed health service, which is free at the point of access and safe for all. And staff know that we have the people behind us, and I think increasingly the government knows that too. So as we move forward as a campaign, we're going to continue to build and push for a joint pay claim for the next pay round, which begins in January. We are urging all of our unions to coordinate the fight for staff and patients and fight for a fully funded and staffed NHS, because we believe this is how we can achieve the best outcomes for all of us. Whilst I'm on here, I do want to send solidarity to all NEU educators who are taking strike action today. My children, like so many others of healthcare workers, were taught throughout the pandemic, with teachers putting themselves at risk so that we could all continue to work. They deserve better than another year of cuts to their pay too, and we all stand with them. So I'll just end with saying happy birthday to our NHS. Thank you to every doctor, nurse, porter, cleaner, secretary, and every single staff group, because despite continued cuts to funding, resources, and the dangerous shortage of staff that we face daily, despite the rampant privatisation we're seeing for profit, both blatantly and by stealth, you all continue to deliver such an incredible service, and I am so proud and happy to be part of the NHS family now and always. Thank you.
Thank you, Holly. Fantastic to hear from you. Always important, of course, to hear from those frontline workers who are always key workers, pandemic or no. Now, hopefully, we can now hear from Andrew Mearson, who is not in the Zoom with us today, but is down in central London. There are several events going on, as I listed at the beginning. There's another one happening at the Carlton Club, which only costs you £150 a head, and it's been hosted by the Yes and We Laughed as well, Conservative Friends of the NHS. So don't worry, we've got a load of activists down there right now outside the Carlton Club, joined by Unite the Union colleagues and friends as well, and we've been mounting a protest outside the Carlton Club. And Andrew, I can just see him there. It says his name is Lewis Baker on the screen, but that's our colleague who's Andrew. Fantastic. Tell us why you're there and what you're doing. Great to see you.
Hey, Tom. Thanks so much. This is Andrew. I'm reporting live from the centre of London, near Green Park, Hyde Park, right outside the Carlton Club, where a group of Tory MPs and Tory supporters have met in order to have a celebratory dinner on this day, the 75th anniversary of our beloved NHS. And it is it's a beautiful sight here. There is supporters of the NHS out here protesting because they are inside there celebrating their achievements. And what are their achievements? Their achievements are inheriting the #1 healthcare system on the planet 10 years ago and then running it into the ground. We now have 7.4 million people waiting on the longest waiting list in NHS history. We have patients waiting longer than ever before to see their GP, to be seen in A&E, to get cancer referrals, and also to be seen as an outpatient. In the 6th wealthiest country on the planet, that represents, in my opinion, a criminal grade level of neglect from the people in charge. And so while they're inside cheering on themselves because they did a great job of running our NHS into the ground and dining for 130 pounds a head, we are outside and we're making our voices heard and letting them know as they walk in, thank you so much for destroying our NHS. They've done a remarkable job over the last 10 years, destroying the public system, pulling massive amounts of money out of it, massive numbers of staff, and they just do not care about patients and staff. And so that's why we're here, letting them know that it is unacceptable that they are inside celebrating their destruction of the NHS while patients suffer across the country. And so we are going to continue the fight, and we will be back. You know, in 25 years, we celebrate the 100th anniversary of the NHS, and we are going to ensure that it regains its spot as the #1 healthcare system on the planet. The only way we're going to do that, though, is if we continue fighting for it. Thank you so much to everybody that's here, everybody that's online, everybody that put this together. This is the only way that we are going to safeguard the NHS for the next generation. Solidarity, keep up the fight. We're going to win this.
Thank you, Andrew. I'm glad that worked. I was a bit nervous, but great. We could hear you fine, and that's fantastic. Really great to see you. Well, yeah, that's what we're doing. We're busy. It's a busy week, and of course, it's not just about celebrating. It's about doing what we can politically, organising and protesting and making sure our voice is heard. We've heard in our opening message with some people from the Labour Party. I'm really pleased that we've got somebody here from the Green Party as well. We have got Dr. Pallavi joined us, who is the Green Party health spokesperson. I can't see you, but if you begin to... You're there. Fantastic. Great to see you again. You're a great speaker. I'm going to pin you to the screen and over to you straight away. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here. And I feel really lucky that we have so many people who love the NHS. Poll after poll, again and again, shows that the NHS is the most cherished institution in this country. Just a little bit about myself. I'm one of those migrants that came to this country. I'm first generation. I came about 26 years ago to the UK. I joined the NHS almost immediately on arriving, trained as a GP here, and I have worked in local hospitals. I've seen the NHS, you know, when I first arrived, I was amazed that every individual in this country had a GP, that they could access quality healthcare. I also saw and was horrified by the waiting times at the time. Gradually, those improved. I saw what investment can do. Waiting times went down. But equally, I was dismayed by the private provisions. And increasingly, I just realized that there's this always this continuing narrative that the NHS is this money-sucking sort of black hole that is always asking for more money. And that's being peddled by certain sections of the media, which I find really annoying and distressing in equal measure. What needs to happen is NHS funding needs to be automatically uplifted with inflation. There shouldn't be any question about it. We should have a sensible view on funding the NHS as a national service, something that benefits the economy, benefits us, gives us much more than economic benefits. But it's an investment in our country, in our future, and in everything we stand for. I was so heartened to hear Tony speak because that's all of the things that he mentioned are things that the Green Party stands for. They're in our manifesto. We believe in a publicly funded NHS, funded by taxation. We believe it must be free to everyone, including migrants to this country, including refugees, including people who are awaiting asylum decisions. There should be no question of them, you know, of whether they're eligible for NHS care. I think it's ugly and abhorrent to every single healthcare worker to have to question the right of any individual who's before them, you know, question whether they actually are deserving of healthcare. It just goes against every principle of healthcare. We believe in improving our social care. We believe in free social care for everyone because that's an integral part of healthcare. And we would introduce free prescriptions as well to everyone. The cost, the money that's raised by this tiny amount of people who actually pay for their prescriptions is insignificant compared to the benefits that would accrue if everybody got free prescriptions. Apart from that, we would support alleviating poverty, because of course that is one of the biggest drivers of ill health. We would actually introduce policies like a universal basic income, which would improve well-being. We would introduce compulsory green spaces accessible to everyone. We would improve housing, put insulation in. All these things are so underrated, and they would do so much to improve healthcare for everyone in this country. It would be fair and it would be beneficial to everyone. I just want to put a few things in context as well. There's been a lot of doom and gloom recently in the media about how the NHS is in its death throes, is it going to survive? I think this fear-mongering, I almost wonder whether it's deliberate. I don't know why people are planting such seeds of doubt in people's minds. I have absolutely no doubt that the NHS is robust, it's strong, it's huge. And it will survive this temporary austerity and this starvation that's been imposed on it for the past 10 to 15 years. We will come out of this much stronger and much better. The NHS employs 1.7 million workers. Yes, we have a shortfall. We're missing 150,000 staff, but we can recover. We can get all this back and more as soon as we start investing in it. It's shameful to hear Steve Barclay talking about, avoiding the question and basically pretending that funding has nothing to do with the state of the NHS. Nothing could be further from the truth. Funding is at the core of what is wrong with the NHS. What it needs is investment now in the short term and into the future. So I think we need to get that message loud and clear. We need to be very, very clear that this is what is needed. In the short term, we need an injection of funds into the NHS. In the medium to long term, we need a workforce strategy. We need long-term funding. We need secure funding and good governance. All of this is eminently achievable. I think the will is there. The people are behind us, and we must make this happen. We can make this happen. As a GP, it's a huge relief for me that I don't have to question the ability of the person in front of me to pay for their treatment. I don't want to ever lose that. I don't want to be in a system where I look at the person in front of me and think, gosh, I'd love you to have some chemotherapy or to have a hip replacement. I don't know how you're going to afford that. We never want to be in such a place. I think the British public understands that, but it's time we spoke up for it. I saw an excellent comment in the chat just now, someone suggesting that, every single candidate who's standing for the next general election must be questioned on their position on the NHS. We have to have a clear rating system. Maybe that's something that, the campaigners that together we can do. Come up with some simple system of identifying who is unequivocally for a free, publicly funded health service and social service and who isn't, so that the public have a clear choice before them and they can make their views heard. We have everything to fight for, but fight we must. We mustn't let the situation get any worse. Luckily, the election is not too far away. Thank goodness we have elections every 5 years. Let's keep the momentum up and let's keep fighting. I'm fortunate to be a GP in the NHS. I love my job. I love looking after my patients. And I, along with all of my colleagues, really, really want to see this flourish and thrive for years to come. Thank you.
Great to hear from you, Pallavi. Thanks so much. Lots and lots of applaud there. We've still got a whole bunch of great speakers, so I'm going to keep rattling on. We are now joined by another parliamentarian, Richard Bergen. I believe I've seen your name in the list. Just begin, and as soon as I hear you, I shall be able to pin you to the screen for everybody.
Wonderful. Thanks very much. Can you hear me?
Perfect. Loud and clear. Over to you.
Thank you. Well, I'm pleased to join everybody tonight, and this should be a moment to celebrate the 75th anniversary of the greatest institution our country has built, and I would say the greatest reflection of socialist principles that we have created. But we're marking this 75th anniversary with the NHS facing its greatest crisis in decades, if not ever. And we know the true human cost of this crisis. Every single one of us knows a loved one, a friend, a neighbour, or a colleague affected by it. But for some, this is no crisis. For some, this is an opportunity. an opportunity to hive off more and more of the NHS to their private shareholder mates, an opportunity to kill off a public healthcare model that we shouldn't forget that the Tories voted 22 times against being created in the first place 75 years ago, to try and stop the NHS from ever being created in the first place. Now, I've sat in the House of Commons chamber and I've seen and I've heard Tory MPs salivating over how this crisis is now the chance to put the nails in the coffin of the NHS. So on this 75th anniversary, let's redouble our efforts to take on the Tory lies that they're using to try to kill off the NHS as we know it. The first lie is the claim that the problem is with the NHS model itself. We're being told that it's simply not possible to have a healthcare model that's publicly run, publicly funded, publicly accountable, and publicly delivered. This is the model that Bevan said would allow people to live free from fear. And this is the model that just a decade ago saw the NHS voted the best performing health service in the world. The NHS model is not failing, it is being failed and deliberately failed by Tory politicians. United States style systems where they feel for your wallet before they feel for your pulse, or of greater private involvement, they're not the solution. Delivering healthcare through a public model is the most efficient and most comprehensive way of delivering it, not least because we don't have the hedge funds and speculators squeezing the profits from the sector, which is exactly what we see happening in social care, which is exactly what we see happening with our water system. The next lie we need to confront is the NHS is somehow unaffordable. This line always makes me laugh. All healthcare needs to be paid for. The question is, who pays? Unless, of course, you're planning to deny healthcare to millions of people, which is what would happen in a private insurance model. Public healthcare is affordable. Firstly, public investment expands the economy. The King's Fund, a leading health think tank, estimates that the multiplier effect of health spending means for every £1 spent on health, £3.60 of income is generated across the economy. Now, given the government gets around a third of this back in tax, much of this investment would effectively pay for itself, even before considering the wider social benefits. Secondly, wealth taxes can raise vital funds. We can easily raise tens of billions of pounds per year, nearly 40 billion, in fact, by just 3 simple measures to tax wealth more fairly. An annual tax of 1.5% on wealth above 10 million would raise 17 billion pounds per year. Ending the non-dom tax avoidance scheme would bring in another 3 billion pounds, while equalising capital gains tax with income tax rates would raise around 16 billion pounds per year. And in doing this, we would redistribute from those who have done very well out of the last period to those that have lost out. And the last lie that we have to take on is that this crisis is in part due to the actions of staff taking strike action. NHS staff didn't create record NHS waiting lists. NHS staff didn't underfund our NHS. NHS staff didn't marketise our NHS. When I was Shadow Secretary of State for Justice, I revealed that the exodus of experienced prison staff meant that the prison service had lost 80,000 years of experience since 2010 due to austerity and due to low pay. The same thing is happening to our health system. We are losing experienced, committed staff. There's no solution to the NHS crisis without resolving the NHS staffing crisis, and that means paying the staff properly. So my last message today, on the 75th anniversary of the birth of our National Health Service, is a message of solidarity with the doctors in their ongoing campaign for fair pay, and solidarity with all the NHS staff, nurses, and every single member of the NHS staff who have been fighting for better pay. And solidarity too with all those who have been targeted by the right-wing press for standing up for fair pay for NHS. I heard Holly speak earlier, and I'm appalled by the way that a right-wing newspaper has targeted her. And let's be clear what this is about. It's an attempt to intimidate activists from standing up for NHS, but I know that people won't be intimidated. I know people will carry on. So the government should give every NHS worker a proper pay rise. And on this, the 75th birthday of our National Health Service, let's vow to make our NHS the best healthcare system in the world, as it was just a decade ago, once again. And let's fight for an NHS that's properly funded, not chronically underfunded, and isn't subject to an ongoing Tory privatisation project. Long live the NHS. Let's restore our NHS. Solidarity with everyone on this call.
Fantastic, Richard. Thanks so much. That's great to hear from you. Okay, moving on. So let me get my list. Right, Harry, I believe you're with us. We've got another nurse zooming in all the way from the Isle of Wight. Fantastic activist and a great friend to us. Harry, are you with us?
I am. Can you hear me all right, Tom?
Yes, fantastic. Great. Over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you. Hello, everybody. And I just want to say thanks to everyone who's spoken so far. So many powerful things and so many, amazing stories already been told. And I think the theme is clear, isn't it, that we need to do everything we can to protect our NHS. So my name is Harry Eccles. I'm a clinical nurse specialist and I work in the field of addiction. I'm so proud to work for our NHS. I work supporting patients with any drug or alcohol related need across the acute setting, so ranging from ED, ICU to the acute mental health wards. I'm also a really proud campaigner of the cross-union group, NHS Workers Say No, which Holly, my wonderful colleague, spoke about earlier. And we're committed to fighting for fair pay for NHS workers and also to protect the wonderful institution that is the NHS, because that ensures that our patients get the care that they deserve. And as NHS workers, that's why we do what we do, because we care. I started my nurse training 8 years ago because I wanted to join the NHS and provide care and advocacy for patients who needed it. And now, like so many NHS workers, I find myself struggling each day to provide the basic care that I'm trained to do and that I know patients deserve. Instead of going home feeling proud about my day, I go home thinking about every missed opportunity to give the care that I need. Now, why is that? It's not because NHS workers aren't working hard. It's not because the public healthcare model doesn't work. It's because we've got a government that are ideologically opposed to our NHS and don't want to see it work and undermine it at every opportunity. NHS workers are holding on by their fingernails, and it's got to a crisis point to such desperation that tens of thousands of workers have been out on picket lines, demanding more from the government, and they're being ignored. Like Holly said earlier, for the first time in the RCN's history, nurses taken to the picket lines is such a shocking indictment on this government's handling of the NHS and their care for nurses. In this recent ballot, 102,000 nurses voted for further strike action. Shame on Steve Barclay and Rishi Sunak for letting it get to that point. Now, for me, the beauty of our NHS is that it doesn't matter who you are, what your background is, or how much money you've got. You get the same access to the most efficacious, evidence-based treatment available. Whether you're a prince or a pauper, you get the same. And that is the most beautiful founding principle of our NHS. And the model works for the people, but unfortunately, it doesn't work for those that are wishing to profiteer. We spend £4.5 billion on agency fees to cover short staffing. Why don't we just pay our staff properly instead? Instead of outsourcing millions of pounds into the private sector, why don't we invest in NHS infrastructure? And it's because this government do not want the NHS to succeed. They can't profit from it. They want to destroy it so that they can sell it off to their cronies and to profiteers. I mean, let's look at the new NHS workforce plan. It's just more smoke and mirrors from a government that don't care. I mean, first of all, it's a 15-year plan, and let's not forget they've been in government for 13 years already. But they refuse to discuss pay in it. And we know that pay is one of the biggest issues, is the biggest issue behind the droves of nurses and doctors that are leaving the NHS. They plan to magic up more doctors and nurses, but without explaining how, probably from the same place they get those hospitals from that you mentioned earlier, Tony, those 40 imaginary hospitals filled with imaginary healthcare staff, because to them, they don't care. It doesn't affect them. They are not members of the public like us who rely on these services day in, day out. And let's be clear, the government and the media seem intent on shaping the public discourse at the moment. You know, the term unsustainable appearing more and more in headlines and on the news. The term reform, you know, and why is that? It's to trick the public into believing that the model doesn't work. But we know that it does. You know, 10 years ago, our NHS was ranked #1 in the world, as my colleague Andrew said earlier. Now look at it, we've got the worst waiting list ever, the worst staffing crisis in history, and the government are behind it. They are the ones that are responsible. So let's challenge our politicians and let's challenge that media narrative. You know, if the private sector are making money out of a crisis, it's not helping out West Streeting. It's called profiteering. It's called capitalising. Let's call out privatisation wherever we see it. Let's call out the shocking underfunding of the NHS. And let's call out the attacks on frontline NHS workers being labelled greedy and lazy by this government. You know, we're on the front line every single day trying to do the best for our patients. We're burnt out and we're exhausted. And this government ignore our cries for help. They're watching staff and patients suffer on a daily basis and they have the power to change it, but they don't. You know, I'm privileged in my job to work alongside some of the most stigmatised and vulnerable patients in my region who desperately need healthcare. Those struggling with addiction, those struggling with homelessness and mental health illness. And I'm so proud that despite their complex backgrounds, the NHS can provide them with the care that they deserve, the care that they need. And we cannot let this wonderful institution be taken from us. You know, we, the public, don't want to sell our NHS. That is clear from every single poll. The public want a public NHS. We want to invest in it and ensure it's there for generations to come. You know, when the people are in crisis, the NHS is there for them. And now that the NHS is in crisis, we need the government to be there for us. So please, everybody, continue to support the fantastic work of Keep Our NHS Public, support all striking workers that are out there fighting for our NHS, write to your MPs demanding protection of the NHS, write to them demanding fair pay for our NHS staff. You know, the NHS is ours and we need to fight for it. This government has no mandate to privatise the NHS, not through stealth and not overtly, so we cannot let them. So thank you so much to everyone who's joined tonight to speak. Thanks for all who've come to listen. You know, together we will win. Happy birthday to our NHS. Thank you.
Thanks, Harry, and happy birthday to our NHS. Indeed, it is worth fighting for. We can fight, and we are fighting, and we can win as well. We've got David Wrigley next. He's a long-time friend of Keep Our NHS Public, a GP, and also on the BMA Council. Important to hear from you, David. I've seen your name. I know you're with us.
I am here.
There you are.
Can you hear okay?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Brilliant. That's great. So it's absolutely wonderful to be here with you tonight. My name's David Wrigley. I'm an NHS GP. I've been a GP for over 20 years in North Lancashire, and I've been a long-time campaigner with KOMP. Good friends with Tony, Wendy Savage, Jackie Davis, many other brilliant campaigners trying to help support the NHS and defend it from all the attacks it's seen over the years. We fought very hard to stop the very damaging Lansley Health and Social Care Bill over 10 years ago. Obviously that went through and has led to more and more problems. And we've got long-standing history in the BMA of supporting the NHS. We support the founding principles of the NHS, and BMA Council, which I sit on with Jackie and Wendy and others, is the overarching committee at the BMA. And again, we've been very supportive of the NHS. I'm also Deputy Chair of the BMA's GP Committee, and I'll talk a bit about general practice. So the BMA is the Doctors' Trade Union. We've now got over 185,000 members. It's gone up quite a lot since the Junior Doctors Action has been taking place, and we're actually just on our, many of us, 500 of us, are just on our way back from our annual BMA meeting in Liverpool, which we've been meeting there for the last 3 days, talking about the problems in the NHS, the problems with the staff that we've got, the lack of pay and lack of support. Indeed, so, we heard from... sorry, is that... Can you hear okay?
Yeah, carry on, sorry.
Oh, no problem. We heard from Professor Michael Marmot, who's a professor of epidemiology, in one of our talks, and he's a brilliant person. I'd encourage you to go and look at his work. He has exposed, you know, the harm that came from the Tory-led coalition in 2010 onwards with austerity, which, you know, made, you know, the rich did very well, but the poor have done really badly. And we've seen life expectancy now fall in this country, which is an absolutely incredible thing to think about. You know, we're the 6th richest country in the world, and since 2010, policies from there on, we're now seeing life expectancy fall for the poorest, I should add, you know, not for the richest. So there's huge problems that we need to try and address. And obviously the BMA has been supportive, and tonight actually the BMA house in London is going to be lit up in blue to thank the NHS, and you can look at the BMA's Twitter feed later when it gets a bit darker to see that. So I'm a GP, as I said. I've been a GP for over 20 years. It's such a privilege being a GP. You know, we offer cradle to grave care. Again, it's obvious there's no fees involved. You know, we hear people talking about bringing in fees for missed appointments. You know, that is just a slippery slope. Often it's people who want to bring in a marketized NHS. And we're the risk sink. You know, we hold a lot of risk with patients who come to us with various conditions, and we'll help and support them and get them through. But that continuity of care is so valuable, so vital, and it's been broken now. General practice is in such a bad place. This government said we'd have 5,000 extra GPs by next year. Successive, you lose count, don't you, of how many health secretaries there's been, but successive health secretaries have said we'll have extra GPs. Well, you know, you'll be able to get to see a GP. Well, we've actually got 2,000 less GPs now since 2008. So that's how bad things are. You know, the crushing workload, the burnouts, the government-sponsored media attacks that we see on GPs about us being lazy, not seeing patients, that turned patients against us who read certain newspapers. We've been vilified. We've been attacked both physically and verbally. Our staff have had a terrible time as well. And we see 1.2 million patients seen every day in NHS general practice. What an amazing statistic that is. And we are doing more with less. We had 1 million more patients were seen last month compared to the same month the year before. So, you know, we are delivering, but the government just refused to accept that. The government treat the staff terribly. They may say fine words at the dispatch box, but that's just not the case at all. You know, doctors working overnight can't even get a hot meal. You know, we're now seeing food banks in hospitals. There's nowhere to rest overnight. You know, car parking charges for all the staff, that should be abolished. And junior doctors obviously now are taking strike action. They've reached a point where nothing else would work. They want to seek pay restoration, which is just trying to get their pay back to what, if they've had inflationary pay rises since 2010, trying to get their pay back to a decent level. They start off with £14 per hour. Often the most senior people in the hospital at night are junior doctors, and they just want to see a fair pay reward for that. And consultants now, of course, have also announced their superb ballot result. They're due to strike in a few weeks' time, and they want to see a properly constituted pay review body, which often is, it says it's independent, but often does the bidding of the government and imposes sub-inflation pay rises as well. So general practice is also going to be looking at mounting a campaign. We've got lots of patient support. We'll be looking to take action. And it's really important that we do that to highlight all the issues that we now see in the NHS before us. So I just want to thank everyone for all the support you give. And I know I'm amongst friends here, and you understand all these issues, but it's really important that we continue to get that message out there. You know, just today we've seen, again, those people coming out of the woodwork talking about things have to change. We've got to look at a different model. Why don't we introduce charging? You know, it's not the model, it's not the type of care that we offer, it's the lack of support, the lack of funding, and the lack of help and support for our wonderful NHS. So thank you all for listening. It's fantastic to be here. Thank you to the NHS and all those campaigners out there, and I wish you all the very best. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Great to hear from you. Lots of rounds of applause being shown. Fantastic as always. We've got another NHS worker. I'm really pleased she could join us tonight. Jordan Rivera is a occupational therapist based in London, and I've seen her speak several times, and she's great too. Over to you, Jordan.
Hiya, thank you so much for inviting me to speak. So yeah, my name's Jordan Rivera, and I'm an occupational therapist, and I've been working in the NHS for about 16 years now, and I'm a Unison member and a Unison rep. So today I was given a cup at work to celebrate 75 years of the NHS, and I really love that, and I am proud of the NHS, proud to work in the NHS, and like many people, it's one of the few things that makes me proud of Britain. It's a fantastic achievement, and it's the way that healthcare should be delivered, the most efficient and effective way and the fairest. But what made me a bit anxious about speaking today was that although I want to celebrate the NHS, I am angry and upset for the NHS and for its staff and for its patients. So, for example, what we've been through in the pandemic, we were working in real fear. And I remember yesterday I remembered that we'd actually only been allowed sufficient levels of PPE, even when we were working directly with COVID patients 9 months into the pandemic. And I remember crying with the relief of that. And up until that time, we were just told all the time, surgical mask is enough. And that was despite over 1,000 NHS staff dying of COVID. For 3 years on, we won't forget that. And, you know, it's taken its toll on us. We also have a government that thinks it's acceptable for health workers to be using food banks. We have a government that thinks it's acceptable for an extra 500 people per week to be dying than would normally have died. And that's due to NHS delays, short staffing and lack of resources. Well, it might be acceptable to this government, but it's not acceptable to me and it's not acceptable to us. This is not how we want our NHS to be. And when NHS staff are crying out to be paid properly so that we can afford to stay in our jobs and the NHS can have the workers that it needs, this awful government's plan is to introduce new staff without qualifications to fill those gaps, or to force doctors to complete their qualifications in 2/3 of the time it would normally take. And that's just ridiculous, and it's going to impact on staff safety. It's really frustrating because we know that what is needed is pay restoration and decent investment in services. So show us some respect, please. We're not stupid. We know this is an attempt at a cheap fix. So, and the other thing is being prevented from taking strike action by this government. So anti-strike laws have already forced us to have 50% of staff voting to take strike action. And now on top of this, when they see key workers are actually able to get 50% turnout because of how incredibly angry they've made us, now they're introducing a new law that means that we need to make sure enough cover is in place. And that is totally insulting because we know full well that they don't care how much cover is in place for the rest of the year. And make no mistake, this law is not about protecting patients. It's about keeping key workers under control. And not only do they want to keep us under control, they want to divide us. The NHS has always relied on workers from around the world. You can see it when we treat you, and you can see it on our picket lines. Without my colleagues from Africa, from the Philippines, from the Caribbean, from every continent and country in the world, the NHS wouldn't function. But the Tories are trying to use racism and the scapegoating of migrants to divide and weaken us, and they're trying to distract us from their attacks. And as trade unionists and as health workers and as supporters of the NHS, we say refugees and migrants are welcome here. We want you to have good lives here. We want to work with you, and we want you to save our lives. So thank you very much. So after ranting about all of these things, these reasons why I'm upset and angry for the NHS, I want to talk about all the things people can do to defend the NHS. And we've had loads tonight. So please do everything you can. If you're in a union, push your union to do more. Speak up on social media. Think of all the things that you're grateful to the NHS for, and speak up and tell people about those things. Write to your MP, write to newspapers, support health workers who are going on strike. Let them know that you support them and that they're doing the right thing, because they're getting a lot of criticism at the minute, and they really need to know everybody's behind them. So get involved with organisations fighting for the NHS. Keep our NHS public, of course, with NHS Workers Say No, with Nurses United and so many more. And get involved with the Workers' Summit that's being organised for September, and that's co-hosted by NHS Workers Say No. You can attend rallies, you can go on the demos, and you can come to the picket lines. And above all, we must oppose all attempts to introduce charges in the NHS, and that we don't want migrants to be charged. We don't want anyone to be charged, because it goes against the whole principle of the NHS, and it will be a slippery slope into being charged wholesale for healthcare. So we have to oppose that. So thank you so much for inviting me today. Yeah, happy birthday, NHS.
Thank you, Jordan. And I'm very glad you came. And it is absolutely, as I've said already, right to be angry about the state of the country and the state of the NHS. If we can save the NHS, we can show how to build a better, more compassionate, more tolerant, more welcoming society. Next up, we have Chantel.
Hi.
Fantastic. Chantel, Will you introduce yourself? It's great to have you, and I'm going to pin you to the screen straight away and let you get on.
Cool, thank you. And thank you for inviting me to speak today, and a huge happy birthday to our NHS. My name's Chantal Lunt. I am many things. I'm a writer, a lecturer, a PhD researcher, but I'm quite well known as an activist. I'm the founder of Merseyside BLM Alliance and Merseyside Alliance for Racial Equality. And, you know, the first thing I obviously want to give a nod to is the fact that within the past few weeks, we've celebrated the 75th anniversary of the Windrush generation, and it's also the 75th anniversary of the NHS, the 75th birthday. And just as we love and celebrate our Windrush generation, we love and celebrate the NHS. But sometimes we really do have to fight for what we love in the same way that we've had to fight for our Windrush generation. We have to fight for the things we love, and we have to fight for our NHS. And I'm going to speak to you not really as an activist right now. I'm going to speak to you as a mother of a child who's got severe asthma, and, you know, you could probably call us frequent flyers to the A&E department. We often spend, you know, long periods of time on the wards, and we're lucky if we have just 5 stays a year in the wards with our little one because he struggles with his breathing. And there's a specific visit to A&E that will always stick with me. It was just Christmas, Christmas just gone. It was a week before Christmas, and we were there on a Monday, and I'm told it's known as a Mad Monday. It was, I've never seen it like that. There wasn't even anywhere to sit down, and my little boy was just having a really bad time with his breathing. I also used to be a police officer, so I'm very well acquainted with A&E waiting rooms, and I was just looking around thinking, like, my little boy was getting quite bad. We'd only been there a few minutes. I could see there were other young people who were really sick, and I'm thinking the nurses were just run off the feet. They were running from room to room. Some had babies in their arms, and I'm thinking, I don't know how they're going to see my little boy. I just don't know what's going to happen. And I understood why, because I could see that they were rushed off the feet, and I was just thinking, I felt so hopeless. When you get to the place where you're supposed to get help and you can just see that might not happen, I felt really hopeless. And there were 2 significant things that happened quite quickly, one after the other. And I'll speak to the first one. The first one was there was a dad next to me who was quite angry at everything, and he said, this is because they're on strike. This is because they're on strike. Now, as someone who shows loads of solidarity with NHS strikers and knows the timetable of strikes, I knew that the nurses weren't on strike, and the nurses at the hospital weren't on strike, and I actually said to them, they're not on strike, actually. This, if you come to this department frequently, is why they are on strike. This is why they're going out, because they are absolutely under-resourced, underpaid, and under immense pressure. This is why they are out on the picket lines. And if you are angry, this is where I did show him the activist in me. I said, if you're angry, do not say a thing to the staff on this ward. If you are angry, you look at the government, look at the Conservatives, look at what they've done to our NHS, because we've got no one to blame but them, and you will not blame the medical staff in this ward. So a little bit of time passed, and this, like, we hadn't seen this for a while, and this nurse walked past, and she just looked absolutely, you know, in Liverpool we'd say chocker. And she just sort of glanced at my son out of nowhere, and she was just like, oh, he's really poorly, let's take him through. And I was just like, honestly, I couldn't believe that she'd seen. I just didn't know how she even noticed that he was sick, because how can you notice that he's sick with all of those, you know, with everyone, and with it being how full it was. And she took him into a room, she got him seen to straight away, and he was, you know, he did brilliantly after that. And it was another situation. There's so many situations when you have a young person who's sick, and when you're someone who relies on the NHS, where you are absolutely, it's crystal clear, especially to me, that my child would not be here without the NHS. There's no questions about it. He wouldn't be here without the NHS. And that's regardless of whether I've been paid, regardless of whether I've got a job, regardless of whether I've got money in my back pocket. We turn up and we get the treatment that we need. And that cannot be underestimated. And the story that they constantly want to peddle to us, the story that the Tories want to make us believe, is that the staff have stopped caring. And that is not the case. The case is that the Tory government have stopped caring. They do not care. One thing that has always been consistent, no matter how busy those wards are, no matter whether it's COVID, no matter whether it's Christmas, no matter what time of year, no matter whether it's, you know, 7 inches of snow outside, The standard of care that we have had from the staff on those wards has never changed. The compassion, the empathy has never changed. There's been times when I've been looking at nurses who are clearly dehydrated and clearly exhausted, and they're asking me if I'm okay, and I want to pull them up on the bed and say, do you need a drink? Are you okay? But they carry on relentlessly. And that's how you know that it's about care and love for the patients. And when I was in that A&E waiting room, I look around when my police says on the phone, you know, if you were a police officer, you would call for backup. But there's no backup because all the A&E wards in the country are in the same position. And I think the NHS needs backup. It needs backup right now. If there's a red button, they will be pressing it. And that's where we come in as the public, as people who support and love and rely on our NHS. We have to back them up. We have to support our NHS workers when they are on strike. We have to stand with them. And we have to absolutely stand against that divisive narrative that the Tory government wants to peddle. It is absolutely down to them and nobody else, the situation that we were in right now. But it can be reversed. It's one of the things that makes me most proud about this country, our NHS. It can be reversed, but we have to stand up and be the backup that the NHS needs. Happy birthday, and just thank you so much. I absolutely love every single person in the NHS. Thank you.
Thank you, Chantal. And really important, thank you so much. Really important to hear those personal stories as well and hear those patient stories as well. So thanks so much for that. So many people here will be parents and all the rest of it who've been through similar things. So that's really, really important. I like what you say about backup. We are the backup. We have to be there. Everyone in this room and all the campaigns we're involved with, that is how change is won. Let's be very, very clear. Politicians, they rubber stamp things. They have to do their job, but we have to put pressure on them to do the right thing. Chantal, that was a fantastic contribution. We've got one last speaker before some final announcements. She is a politician. She's also a patron of Keep Our NHS Public. We're very glad to have her as such as well. Margaret Greenwood, I've seen you in your name crop up. Are you there?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, that's great. Okay, I'm just going to pin you to the screen and start whenever you're ready.
Thank you so much. And I'm just delighted to be able to join you all on this rally to celebrate the 75th birthday of our National Health Service. And can I say, I just feel so great to have heard, I'm sorry I missed all of your speech, Chantal, but it was so inspiring to hear firsthand about the pride that NHS staff have in the work that they do. And we are so grateful to you for it. I'd like to start by thanking each and everybody on the call who campaigned so hard to keep the National Health Service going and to keep it public. It was launched at a time when the country was reeling from the devastation of war, and yet Nye Bevan had the vision and determination to deliver it. Speaking in the House of Commons on the 30th of April 1946, he spoke of at the second reading of the original National Health Service bill and spoke of lifting the shadow from millions of homes. He said, it will keep very many people alive who might otherwise be dead. It will relieve suffering. It will produce higher standards for the medical profession. It will be a great contribution towards the well-being of the common people of Great Britain. What a phenomenal contribution. A comprehensive and universal service free at the point of use for all who need it. But we know that its future is very seriously under threat. In the 2022, the Conservatives' Health and Care Act provided for the setting up of statutory integrated care boards and integrated care partnerships. That act openly allows people with interests in private health to sit on integrated care partnerships, and it is vague around who can sit on integrated care boards and their subcommittees, opening up for the potential for decisions about public health care to have a profit motive. In 2012, we had the Conservative and Lib Dems Health and Social Care Act. Again, this put profits before patients. One of the key provisions of that was to allow NHS Foundation Trust hospitals to, in effect, make 49% of their income from treating private patients. These are our hospitals. They are handing them over to the private sector. And of course, we know that the NHS is suffering from years of chronic underfunding, and this is impacting on the ability of our dedicated NHS staff to deliver the care that they are so committed to. A recent study by the King's Fund of 19 nations concluded that Britain achieves only below average health outcomes because it spends a below average amount for each person on healthcare. It pointed out that the UK underperforms significantly on tackling its biggest killer diseases, in part because the NHS has been weakened by years of underinvestment. This underfunding has real life consequences, and it is the blame for this has to be put firmly at the government's door. It has a shocking impact on patients and on staff who are so massively overstretched. The underfunding isn't because the country can't afford it. The country can afford it. It's because of the political decisions made by successive governments to run down our National Health Service as a public universal service. It is very clear to me that for years now, the Tories have been absolutely committed to privatising the National Health Service. It is the view of Professor Philip Banfield, chair of the BMA, that the government is failing to demonstrate that this is not setting out to destroy the NHS, and I believe he is absolutely right. What we are seeing in the NHS is government-planned chaos, a determined campaign to take our NHS from us and create opportunities for the private sector. I've spoken with many nurses on picket lines over the last year, and they have spoken about the crises that they face every day. Wards understaffed, colleagues stretched to breaking point, patients crammed into corridors and ambulances backing up with patients they cannot hand over, and more. I was proud to stand in solidarity with the nurses, and I stand in solidarity with all striking NHS staff, including the junior doctors. I commend each and every person on this call today who's come to show their commitment to the NHS. We are facing the fight of our lives, but I know that we are up to the challenge. And if we don't do it, who will? As campaigners, we need to be vigilant and call out examples of privatisation in the NHS. We need to be vigilant when monitoring the rationing of treatments. We need to be vigilant in identifying a postcode lottery emerging. We need to hold NHS England and the government to account on the new workforce plan. We must monitor the long waiting lists for treatments and highlight the fact that the blame for this lies firmly at the Conservatives' door. And we need to defend the terms and conditions of NHS workers. We need to speak out when we see mergers, closures and downgrading of services. And we need to keep a keen eye on what the reorganisation means for the viability of local hospitals and for the viability of A and E departments. We can raise these issues in all sorts of ways, in press, on social media, through petitions, and above all, politically. So I put out an appeal. When you see these things happen, make sure your Member of Parliament knows about it. Go to visit them. Require that they meet with you. Require that they meet with a group of you to understand what is being done to the NHS in your area and hold them to account. The NHS is this country's finest social achievement. It's there for each and every one of us when we need it. Free at the point of need, publicly funded, delivered by public sector workers. It is precious beyond measure. We have a fight on our hands, but we are here today on the NHS's 75th birthday to commit to that fight, and I'm sure we were equal to it.
Brilliant. Thank you, Margaret. Great to see you. Thank you so much. Fantastic. Well, remarkably, we are on time. So I'm just going to make a few announcements before we wrap. Firstly, thank you to all of our 12 amazing speakers from right across the NHS, from people who use it, people who work in it, people who campaign for it. And we're very, very grateful. And I think, you know, the comments we've been getting and the applause and all that stuff really shows that we're all very, very grateful. Thank you also to everybody who's come tonight. Fantastic to have so many of you. NHS campaigners are very busy this week. NHS staff who've joined us are always insanely busy, of course. So especially we're very grateful for you to make the time and the space to be here. As I said at the beginning, this is just one event of many. There are several events over the last few days. There's another event, as we saw from Andrew, who's also a junior doctor, by the way, who's been involved in the BMA strikes, talking to us from central London. They're still there now, outside the Carlton Club, still protesting. That's what we have to do, is keep fighting, keep protesting, keep campaigning, all of the great things that Margaret's just suggested we do, all of the things that people like Jordan and Holly and Harry and others have suggested we do. Get involved with our unions, get involved with campaigns like Keep Our NHS Public. Please do join Keep Our NHS Public. It doesn't cost the earth, it helps us do all of our work. Please do go to the Keep Our NHS Public website. We've got lists of all the other events that are happening right through the rest of this week. We've also got a whole bunch of people going to Durham Miners Gala on Saturday as well. So if you're in the Northeast, it'd be great to see you there. There's so much we can do. The point that we have to make is that the NHS is worth saving. We've seen from all the contributions that that's absolutely clear. But the point that I think sometimes gets lost is this: we can save the NHS. Dr. Pallavi spoke to this, and so many other people have. In fact, the only way things get done for ordinary people like us is by this kind of campaigning. There is no other way. Nobody does it for us. But the good news is we can put the pressure on. We can indeed save the NHS. So look out for more materials coming from us soon. We're putting together a whole range of fact sheets to help with your campaigning. We'll be putting together a series of more in-depth meetings where we'll be inviting the audience to contribute and ask questions. We've done lots of listening tonight, but we want to do a whole load of sessions where you get to do most of the talking. So look out for those things soon. Donate to Keep NHS Public, donate and join all these other campaigns that we've heard from. Thank you so much, everybody else, and good night.